Hello everyone, this is Cherise Elika T. Lucas, and I am here to continue to discuss about Erikson's post-Freudian theory. So let's first recap the first 5 stages of a psychosocial development, namely the infancy, early childhood, preschool or play age, school age, and the adolescence with its respective psychosocial crises. So to continue, let's tackle the 6th stage, which is the young adulthood. Young adulthood begins with the acquisition of intimacy at about age 18 and ends with the development of generativity at about age 30. The psychosexual mode of young adulthood is genitality, which is expressed as mutual trust between partners in a stable sexual relationship. So, the young adults should develop a mature genitality on this stage by having a mutual trust on the partner and only exist by having an intimate relationship including sharing of sexual satisfactions. And the psychosocial crisis on this stage is the intimacy versus isolation. Intimacy is the ability to fuse one's identity with that of another without fear of losing it, whereas isolation is the fear of losing one's identity in an intimate relationship. The developmental task is to form positive close relationship between with others. The hazard of this stage is that one will fail to form an intimate relationship with a romantic partner or a friend and become socially isolated. So in this stage, you know na yourself through your ego identity. Therefore, you also choose yung mga magiging friends mo, your circle friends. Alam mo na kung ano yung gusto mong qualities na magiging romantic partner mo. So that is intimacy. It's not just about the intimate relationship between your partner, but also even with your friends in a way that alam mo na kung ano yung mga qualities ng isang kaibigan na hinahanap mo. Isolation, on the other hand, is more of about isolating yourself. Gusto mo na lang mag-isa. Kasi you have tried getting into many relationships but it doesn't work. Why? It's because you don't even know yourself or you confused about yourself. Yung values mo sa life, yung standing grounds mo. Kaya yung iba, nililigawan na lang kung sinong babae dahil hindi nila alam ang type nila sa isang babae. So kapag nakapasok sa isang relationship, isang tendency, hindi nagtatagal even ang partner is napapansin na hindi sila same ng characteristics or identity. So kung titignan natin sa previous stage, which is the adolescence, our task is to attain our identity, which is very important in this stage in finding intimate relationship and our circle of friends. The crisis between intimacy and isolation results in the capacity to love. The core pathology of young adulthood is exclusivity or inability to love. So as you can see here in the picture, the major question is, will I be loved or will I be alone? So that is the intimacy and the isolation. And the important event in this stage is the involvement in a romantic relationship of a partner or an individual. So the 7th stage is the adulthood, the period from about 31 to 60 years of age, and it is a time when people make significant contributions to society. The psychosexual mode of adulthood is procreativity, or the caring for one's children, the children of others, and the material products of one's society. And procreativity is more than the sexual relationship with a partner, but it includes bearing a child and the responsibility for taking care of our offspring or the offspring as a result of that sexual contact. The psychosocial crisis on this stage is the generativity, which means transmitting something positive to the next generation. This can involve such as roles as parenting and teaching, through which adults assist the next generation in developing useful lives. So, generativity, it's not just about generating, but giving back to the next generation. So, Erikson described the stagnation as the feeling of having done nothing to help the next generation. So, in this stage, family person na mga middle adult. And they are now capable of giving back to the next generation by teaching their offspring. Sa trabaho naman, in the stage na 30 to 60s in which nandoon na sa supervisory level and by teaching your apprentice at work or successor. The thing here is that it should be someone na next on your line or younger than you to train na siyang papalit sa iyo, and that is generativity. Meanwhile, if you fail to meet the intimacy on the previous stage or levels, the tendency is that nagsastop yung capabilities mo, your learning, your wisdom, and knowledge hanggang sa'yo. You cannot teach someone or pass it on your successor. So, for example, if you fail to meet the intimacy in the previous level, so wala kang anak, diba, to pass your learnings, and you cannot have that sense of generativity. But then, there are different perspective at hindi naman ibig sabihin na yung mga matatandang dalaga is nandoon na sila sa stagnation. No, it's because there are other people who can find generativity or can still succeed in generativity even if it's not their own offspring. Nandyan naman yung nagtuturo sa ibang bata or sa trabaho. So that is generativity versus stagnation. The psychosocial crisis of adulthood is generativity versus stagnation, and the successful resolution of this crisis results in care. And Erikson saw care as taking care of the persons and products that one has learned to take care of. And the core pathology of adulthood is rejectivity, or the rejection of certain individuals or groups that one is unwilling to take care of. And care is not about the duty or obligation, but a natural desire that emerges from the conflict between the generativity versus stagnation. And reject is manifested in self-centeredness, provincialism, and responsible siya sa human hatred, destruction, or wars. So as you can see in the picture, the major question is, how can I contribute to the world? So as what I have said kanina, it's about giving back to the next generation. And the important event is the parenthood and work with the basic virtue of care. Next is the old age as the final stage of development, and it is about age 60 until death. So older adults in this stage tends to review their lives, reflecting on what they have done. Also, they can be that caring grandparents to their own grandchildren as well as to the younger members of the society. The psychosexual mode of old age is generalized sensuality, and that is taking pleasure in a variety of sensations and an appreciation of the traditional lifestyle of people of the other gender. So, men become more nurturant and more acceptant of the pleasures of non-sexual relationships, including those with their grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Women also become more interested and involved in politics, finance, and world affairs. The psychosocial crisis of old age is integrity versus despair, and the struggle between integrity and despair may produce wisdom, the basic strength of old age. But it may also lead to disdain, a core pathology marked by feelings of being finished or helpless. So, if the retrospection evaluations are positive, then they develop integrity, in which they view their life as worth living or positively integrated. In contrast, older adults become despairing if their backward glances are mainly negative. So, in this psychosocial crisis, kung napapansin nyo sa mga matatanda, they tend to find or they tend to reminisce what they have done in their life. So, if you have developed the stagnation, isolation, identity confusion from the other stages, then the tendency is parang walang positive na overview or nangyayari throughout your years. So, you will develop the sense of despair or parang hindi ka fulfilled. Matatapos na ang buhay mo pero parang may kulang. Why? It's because hindi mo nakilala ang sarili mo. On the other hand, integrity is which you have that feeling of fulfillment. You have done what you have done, you explored yourself, even if there's challenges, but still na-overcome mo. For example, yung movie na Up, where you can observe the development of Mr. Fredrickson, the old widower. So since hindi sila nagkaroon ng anak ng asawa niya, and nung nawala ang asawa niya, naging grumpy siya yung personality niya. Pero however, nung na-meet niya ang bata, which is si Russell, Mr. Fredrickson is now smiling, and he even attend the pinning ceremony of Russell. So makikita natin na doon siya nakadevelop ng sense of integrity because he felt fulfilled with the help of Russell, yung bata na Boy Scout. He was able to reach the dream of his wife. So the point is, just like in the movie, if you don't feel fulfilled or meron pang bagay na hindi pa natin na-achieve, the tendency is whenever we look back, nandoon yung sense of despair ng tao. We always long for something that we weren't able to reach on our younger years. Integrity naman, hindi naman porket hindi mo pa na-fulfill, ibig sabihin that's the end of it. But rather, there are different ways para at least we can still have the sense of integrity. Just like in the movie Up. At the end of the movie, doon niya palang nakuha or na-develop ang sense of integrity. If we look into the picture, the major question on this stage is, did I live a meaningful life? So as what I have said, they tend to reminisce what they have done on their younger years. And the important event is reflecting back on life with the basic virtue of wisdom. So to sum up Erikson's 8 stages of life, wherein we have the infancy with the psychosocial crisis of trust and mistrust, early childhood with autonomy versus shame and doubt, play age with the crisis of initiative versus guilt, the school age with the crisis of industry versus inferiority, the adolescence with the identity versus identity confusion, the young adulthood with the psychosocial crisis of intimacy versus isolation, the adulthood with generativity versus stagnation, and lastly, the old age with the psychosocial crisis of integrity versus despair. So let's now proceed to Erikson's method of investigation. So he insisted that personality is a product of history, culture, and biology, and his diverse methods of investigation reflect this belief. So we have here two methods of investigation, namely anthropological studies and psychohistory. So in anthropological studies, Erikson have two most important studies, which were Sioux of South Dakota and the Yurok tribe of Northern California. So let's talk first about Sioux of South Dakota. So as he made a field trip at Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota to investigate the causes of apathy in that area, or the lack of emotion, interest, or concern. And he found out that this is because of an extreme dependency the Sioux developed as a result of their reliance on various federal government programs. So initially, Sioux tribe were known to be trusting and generous, but this native culture had almost disappeared as reservation lifestyle reinforced by the U.S. government. At one time, they have been a courageous buffalo hunters, but they no longer hunted their food. Instead, they're living as farmers. Their traditional rituals such as rites of passage had almost abandoned. Same study goes with the Yurok tribe of Northern California, wherein they live mostly on salmon fishing. Although these tribes had vastly divergent cultures, they differ in training its youth, where in the Yurok tribe children were removed from mother at a young age and had no strong national feeling or a little taste of war. So both studies demonstrated his notion that culture and history helped shape personality and become aware of the influence the culture and external events have on behavior. Next is the psychohistory, in which Erikson combined the methods of psychoanalysis and historical research to study several personalities, most notably Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther, and I know we are very familiar with these personalities. Both Luther and Gandhi had an important impact on history because both was an exceptional person with the right personal conflict living during historical period that needed to resolve collectively what could not be resolved individually. So, known si Gandhi sa iyang self-imposed fasting as a political weapon niya. He evolved the technique of passive resistance known as satyagraha and used it to solve his conflicts and authorities. Satyagraha is a Sanskrit term meaning tenacious, stubborn method of gathering the truth. And he experienced an identity crisis when a mill workers demand for a 35% pay, but the owners would offer no more than 20% increase. As the workers' spokesperson, he pledged to not eat until the workers' demands were met, until the owners reached a compromise to have a 35% pay for workers to work for a day and 20% for another day. His passive resistance had helped shape his identity and had given him a new tool for peaceful political and social change. As for Martin Luther, where he is known for contributions in American civil rights movement, where he organizes marches and protests. Also, he is famous for his speech, I Have a Dream, in which he spoke of his dream of a U.S. that is void of segregation and racism. Next is Erikson's related research, wherein he expanded Freud's notion of development all the way into the old age. And he stimulated quite a bit of empirical research, much of it on adolescence, young adulthood, and adulthood. And his two related researches are ego identity status in adolescence across cultures and thus identity precede intimacy. So, in ego identity status in adolescence across cultures, a study was conducted by Holger Busch and John Hofer to the European nation of Germany and the African nation of Cameroon to test the personality development theory across cultures. So, the German and the Cameroon adolescents were given three tests, namely the extended objective measure of ego identity status, pro-social tendencies and generativity concern scales, and self-construal scales. So the findings reflect how each culture provides unique pathways through Erikson's stages, but appears to be epigenetic across cultures, as what Erikson predicted. So, for example, in cultures that emphasizes a more interdependent self-construal like Cameroon adolescence, adapting identity elements from one's elders may be more valued than it is in a more dependent or independent culture like Germany or even in the United States. So, furthermore, authors discuss how cultures differ in definitions of pro-social behavior, emphasize moral obligations and personal choice. Yet, despite these distinctions between cultures, resolving our identity crisis in adolescence, regardless of where we reside, enables us to better take other needs to heart, to behave accordingly, and even to begin consider turning around and giving back to the next generation. So the second related research is, does identity precede intimacy? So according to Wim Bayers and In Saif Gekrenka, examined data from 52 females and 41 males in a 10-year longitudinal study in Germany to assess whether Erikson's developmental ordering of identity first then intimacy still holds true. So, gusto nila i-test if, for example, nag-fail ka to develop your ego or identity in adolescent stage, meron bang tendency na mag-fail ka rin in finding an intimate partner or handling an intimate relationship? So, Erikson stated that healthy identity development during adolescence is a precursor of intimacy in romantic relationship during emerging adulthood. However, from a developmental contextual perspective, there are reasons to question this strict developmental ordering. So Erikson argued that adolescents who fail to find a suitable identity may have difficulty forming and maintaining long-lasting, close relationship with romantic partners. So in stage 6, Erikson described the crisis of intimacy versus isolation. During this period, the focus of emerging adults is on developing close, intimate relationship with others. The positive outcomes of this stage are the development of close relationship and loving sexual relationship. Negative outcomes, on the other hand, are reflected in loneliness, isolation, and fear of relationship. Erikson added that these difficulties may stem from an earlier failure to develop a strong identity. Although meron naman tayong na-experience na intimate relationship, which is normal and part sa development, but the real genuine intimacy with you and a partner can be attained if both of you develop your sense of identity. According to Erikson, the condition of two-ness is that one must first become oneself. So we should know ourselves first before indulging into an intimate relationship with another person. So let's now proceed to the critique of Erikson. Erikson built his theory largely on ethical principles and not necessarily on scientific data. He came to psychology from art and acknowledged that he saw the world more through the eyes of an artist than through those of a scientist. And he had nothing to offer except a way of looking at things. His books are admittedly subjective and personal, which undoubtedly adds to this appeal. Although Erikson's work is a logical extension of Freud's psychoanalysis, it offers a new way of looking at human development. As a useful theory, it rates high on its ability to generate research. So, for example, the topic of ego identity alone has generated several hundreds of studies and other aspects of Erikson's developmental stages. Also, it rates high on its ability to be falsified, in which many findings from this body of research can be explained by theories other than Erikson's developmental stages theory. Also, it rates high on organization of knowledge, in which it does not adequately address such issues as personal traits. Also, it rates average on guide to action, in which this concept of intimacy versus isolation and generativity versus stagnation have much to offer to marriage counselors and others concerned with intimate relationships among young adults. And second to the last is, it rates high on internal consistency, in which mostly because terms used to be labeled to the different psychosocial crises, basic strengths, and core pathologies are very carefully chosen. And lastly, it rates high on parsimony, in which the precision of its terms is a strength, but the descriptions of psychosexual stages and psychosocial crises, especially in the later stages, are not always clearly differentiated. And lastly, in the concept of humanity, Erikson saw humans as basically social animals who have limited free choice and who are motivated by past experiences, which may be either conscious or unconscious. And in addition, Erikson is rated high on both optimism and uniqueness of individuals. So, I think that's all for the post-Freudian theory of Erik Erikson. And a quote to remember from him is that, "The more you know yourself, the more patience you have for what you see in others." And thank you for listening, everyone, and God bless.